So, John is a rock star in this industry. He joined the leadership team of Republic Services in 2013 as their Chief Marketing Officer, where he advanced their customer-centric approach. And because he's just so darn good at his job, he advanced quickly and took on the role of Chief Operating Officer last year, which included managing the 7th largest fleet in the United States, something that boggles my mind. And again, because he's just so darn good at his job, he was appointed as president of Republic Services in April of this year, where he has the great responsibility to help grow Republic's ongoing growth and their transformation. And I'm also told that he is a CrossFit enthusiast and overall interested in well-being and wellness. So I guess that means that you got to keep your eyes and ears sharp, because we got to keep up with him as he has so much information to share with us this evening. So please help me welcome John Vander Ark to the stage.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Phoenix. I'm delighted that SWANA has chosen our hometown for your conference. I think you're going to have a great week of weather and sounds like a great conference. I want to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart tonight, and I think that has occupied a lot of your time and energy over the last 2 to 3 years, and that's recycling. And I want to talk about 3 things. I want to talk about what's happened to recycling, right? Where are we and how did we get here, even more importantly? And then I want to talk about where do I think the market is headed. And then I want to talk about how do we jointly shape that future. But before I start, I want to get a couple of caveats. One, I want to give you some sense of where recycling and sustainability kind of fits more broadly in the context. So we live in a very polarized climate right now, politically. And there's a lot of questions about what is business's role in society and what is society's role in business. And you're seeing 2 very divergent choices come out. Some is the Milton Friedman school of, hey, society, stay out of business. Business's job is to make money, to serve the shareholder. That should be their singular focus, and society's best move is to stay out of business. And then you're seeing an alternative idea emerge on the other end, which is reimagining what a corporation is, who they serve, who the stakeholders are, what their fundamental purpose is. Right? And I would argue that we're left with kind of an unsatisfactory and a false set of choices. So we as Republic have spent a lot of time thinking about this topic, not in the last 6 months, but really over the last 4 or 5 years. And we've come up with this idea of value for all. And we start with customers. Right? Without customers, we don't exist. So we better be creating value for customers, and we take that very seriously. Next on our list is employees. 37,000 people in our company rest part of their hopes and dreams and livelihood with us. And we feel great responsibility to create value for those employees. And then we think about communities in which we operate. Right? We serve 42 states and we operate locally. That's where our employees live and work. And we want to serve those communities. We want to serve those individual townships, counties, cities, municipalities. But we also want to serve the global community. We want to make a difference for the planet. And we feel great responsibility for that. So we think about customers, employees, community, and then we say, well, then shareholders. That's who owns us, right? We can't run away from that. We have to serve shareholders. And what we found is this dialogue in the media that you're seeing, this false choice, is really that. Because we figured out, man, hey, if we serve our customers, if we create value for our employees, if we create value for the communities in which we operate, our shareholders end up doing really, really well along the way. And we're committed to the topic of recycling. We think that's part of serving the communities. And we've gotten recognized substantially for doing that, for serving the communities in which we operate. And we're really, really proud of that. Now, second caveat. Right, I'm going to give you some very clear opinions about where I think recycling has gotten, why we've gotten there, and where we're headed. I have no corner on the truth. Right? 3 years ago, I couldn't have predicted we'd be here right now, the current level of commodity prices and what's happening in this industry. And if I had, I wouldn't be here, because I'd be sitting on a beach drinking a cocktail because I would have shorted the market or done something else to make a lot of money if I had all that insight. So I don't have any corner on the truth, and I think you're going to hear a range of opinions this week, and I think that's one of the benefits of these conferences. You get to hear some divergent thinking, and you get to put all that together and say, okay, what does that mean for me in my business, in my community going forward? Okay, with that, let me kind of shift gears and get into, hey, what has happened with recycling? If you could keep flipping for me. Okay, what you see here in the news, right? Lots of things going on, right? You read the headlines. And David talked a little bit about it before. Talked about China's sword, right? And that being a big impact in society. And a lot of people think, well, it's global trade and it's Trump. And frankly, global trade and Trump it's probably exacerbated our problem, but China's sword started long before that, and you've kind of all read the headlines, right? China used to take in about 40% of the industry's recycling, right? And now that's moved to about 0%. Now, we still ship about 40% of our stuff internationally, ironically, but only 0% of that's gone to China. So that's created a major change in the environment. And if you look behind me here, you can see, if you go back one slide, you can see this is the Wall Street Journal. This is what's happened to commodity prices, right? So you're seeing a substantial drop in commodity prices on the things that we typically recycle and then sell out of the back end of a recycling center. So dramatic changes in the market. And then if you say, okay, well, what does that mean in terms of commodity prices? Put it all together. This is the bundle that we think about. Commodities have always gone up and down over the years. Right? It has been a cyclical business. And I would argue that we're not in a cyclical change for this business. We're in a structural change. Right? When 40% of the market stops buying, the market has structurally changed. Right? And that's had some pretty substantial impacts, right, on our business. So landfill tons. Right? We estimate across the industry this year, about 1.5 million tons across the industry that were getting recycled 2 years ago are going to end up in a landfill. Right? And there's a lot of reasons for that, some of which is for some of the commodity markets, there is no market. There is no place to take it. No one's buying it. And so that has to end up at a landfill. Some of it is curbside programs have either closed or they've retracted. And some of it is just the supply chain has got really dislocated. I talked about us sending 40% of our material to China, right? As we found other Southeast Asian markets to send material to, that's taken some time. And guess what? Most of this material, as we produce it on the back end of a recycling center, sits outside. And if that's plastics, no problem. If that's cardboard or fiber or mixed paper, that's no good, right? And you've all seen that in your markets as well. Some of those tons have gotten landfilled. We've seen recycling centers close. As these businesses, right, they make their money typically on the back end historically, right? They've closed down their operations, right? And then we've talked about some curbside programs that have either been ended, suspended, or reduced over time. So substantial changes going on in the business. So the question is, how did we get here, right? Why did this happen? And you could say, well, this is China, right? And I would argue that China is the root cause of the problem, or China is not the root cause, they're the symptom of the problem, they're not the root cause. The root cause of this problem is that our curbside programs got built out in the late 90s, early 2000s when commodity prices were at a high. Right? We priced this business out, right, or built this business model out on the back end of it. Right? Garbage to gold. We were going to make all our money on the back end of the business. And that's when participation took off. And that's how we made our money. And I'm not throwing stones at anybody. We were part of that. That's how we priced that business over time. That created a problem, right? Because we built a business model, right, on a lot of volatility, right? When people invest in solid waste and recycling companies like Republic, like Waste Connections, like Waste Management Advanced, I could keep going, because we're stable, right? We're not recession-proof, but we're recession-resistant. And that's why people invested in the business over time. They didn't invest for this volatility. Right now, again, I'm not assigning blame, right? But the root cause of this crisis is we built this thing out on a business model, right, that was inherently volatile. Now, the honest answer is recycling costs more than solid waste, right? And again, you've all done your own economics over time. It costs more than solid waste. So collecting it can be puts and takes over time, but typically it costs more to collect because you cube out the truck pretty quickly in that front. Right? It is more costly to process, right? Typically 2 or 2.5 times more. Landfill rates vary substantially, processing rates, but if you look across the country, average landfill rates are about $50 a ton, and processing is $100 to $120 a ton to process the material. Now, commodity values, right, offset some of that. And so they offset that cost difference in an average and above average market. But in the current market, it's not even close. And again, the problem is we priced this free at the curb when we built it out. And now maybe it's $2 a home, $3 a home, but you're charging residents $15 a home for solid waste, right, and $3 a home for recycling. So we built this concept that recycling isn't free, or recycling is free, or recycling is really, really low cost. Right? So again, that's why we're here. That's how we got here. The more important question is, okay, where's the market going forward? Now, again, short answer is, right, I answered this question with humility. Right? I don't know exactly where the market's going. Again, if I knew, I'd probably be sitting somewhere else right now. But I can paint 3 potential scenarios for you. The first is actually that the market melts down. And you'll say, well, John, I thought the market already did melt down. And I'd say, listen, this market could further melt down. So we could have more supplier market failure, meaning we could have more recycling centers that close their doors over time. We could see an unwillingness to pay from municipalities, right? They're not going to charge the residents more, no more money comes into the system. Curbside programs further attract, and we further consolidate recycling really down to a handful of commodities, aluminum, cardboard, on the coasts and in municipal markets, right? You could paint that scenario. And you'd say, oh, man, you're being draconian, you're being just so negative on this thing, scare tactic, right? And open the aperture for a second. I want to just give you a few other examples of how the world can change in unpredictable ways. So Berlin Wall falls in the late 80s, and democracy starts to come into Russia. And Gorbachev had already started that with glasnost and perestroika in the late 80s, but tons of foreign investment comes in. Elections happen in Russia, and that really, there is a belief that democracy is a superior system, and when the people of Russia get a taste of that, that market is going to move, right? And we are going to become a democratic society. Now, fast forward to today. Now we're talking about a second version of the Cold War, and we're in an information and misinformation race with Russia. So the world has changed in a very dynamic way, in a way most people wouldn't predict. Global trade. There was a belief that global trade is an inevitable phenomenon. As China got built out and Southeast Asia got built out, and people configured their supply chains in Mexico and Southeast Asia. And lo and behold, what have we seen? We've seen a reversal in global trade flows. It's actually gone backwards. Very, very few people in this room or on Wall Street or anybody else 5 years ago would have said global trade is going to reverse. Who in this room a decade ago would have predicted that England was on the brink of leaving the EU? Right? Card-carrying member of the EU. Right? Almost unthinkable. And again, I'm not trying to wade into the political waters here, but 5 years ago, who in this room, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, would have believed that a reality TV show who had never held political office was going to be the President of the United States? It happens. So this idea that, well, hey, recycling is inevitable, and that's what people want to do, and it's just going to happen, right? Not true. Markets change in very predictable and dynamic ways. Now, I think that's the first scenario. I think the second scenario is equally viable, which is this thing could bounce back. Again, in the stroke of a tweet, global trade flow or a trade deal with China could be hatched, right? And they could get really sick of buying virgin fiber, and materials could rush back in, And curbside programs could further come back or further expand, right? And you could see recycling, take off. And you'd see more willingness to pay, right, at the curb, and things could take off. Now, the reality is, I think we're going to live in a divergent future, all right? And that's where I think you're going to see pieces of both of these things happen. So on one hand, the stream starts to get sorted out, and we recycle more of the high-value commodities, and the lower-value commodities get pushed out of the stream. I think you're going to see more effort from manufacturers in design for recycling, taking material content out of the stream, right, and thinking about life cycle or producer costs, right, for some of the things. You're already seeing that in the plastics industry, for example. Technological advancements in recycling centers. I'm going to come back to that in a bit. I think accelerating recycling activity along the coasts and in urban centers, and then probably some scale back of programs in rural places where there isn't a lot of willingness to pay, right? And we're already seeing this trend play out. So on one hand, just this year, right, we've closed a few recycling centers. We've declined to bid on processing contracts in facilities that we operate. We've had our municipalities ask us to take programs out, right? So this impact is real. We're seeing this trend. Now, on the other hand, at the exact same time, we're making major investments. I think we have the state-of-the-art recycling facility in the United States in Plano, Texas. Made major investment in Las Vegas, Nevada over the last couple years. Lots of investments in the work of retooling our existing facilities in Seattle and a lot of other places. And tons of work on organics to further drive diversion on landfills. So you're seeing two trends happen at the exact same time. So I think this is the most likely scenario, right? But the question is, how do we control the future? Again, I don't think the future is knowable. I think it's very controllable, right? And that's what I want to submit to you today and leave you the idea. I think we in this room have the opportunity to jointly shape our future. So I want to talk about 5 areas that I think we can collectively work on to shape our future. The first is service design, right? I started out in marketing. I always start with the customer. What is good for the customer? So single stream, well, that got built out on a really bad time for the business model because we configured it the wrong way. Single stream has been enormously effective and impactful for residents. And we see that all the time. We still are converting programs from source-separated curbside programs to single stream. We see kind of a minimum 30% increase in participation, up to 200% increase in participation. So this absolutely drives activity. Now, there's challenges with single stream. And you've seen some stones thrown at single stream in the press. So it does drive contamination. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing there. It creates labor challenges. Right? So there's no question that operating essentially a bale facility is much easier and simpler than operating a sorting facility, and that could be a challenging labor. So again, I think there's this dialogue of can we go back to it, and I am fiercely opposed to it. And I think there is very little chance you're going to see wide-scale regression or reversion back to these programs for 2 reasons. One is, what does the customer want? Customer wants convenience, they want ease, they want single stream, right? And it drives more recycling activity. Second thing is, and the thing people aren't talking about, is our most important resource, our people. Safety. Right? We are one of the 5 most dangerous industries in the United States. Right? And a program that has people getting out of the truck increases the danger. And I don't care how good you think you are, or how safe you think your employees are, it's the world in which we're operating. Distracted driving is a major epidemic that we are all working through, right? And anything that takes our drivers and operators out of the vehicle, right, I think is a bad choice for safety. So start with service design. The second thing that I think we can work on together is education. Right? We've got to move away from this wish cycling to reality. Right? What is really recyclable? And all of you have had this conversation with a friend, neighbor, cousin, somebody who asks and just is shocked that they can't recycle the greasy pizza box. Right? They want to so bad, right? They want to do the right thing, And we have to tell them the bad news that actually, not only can that not be recycled, if you do that, that could actually contaminate a load, right? And that could, create problems over time. So people want to do the right thing. That's the good news. They want to do the right thing. They care. They just need to know the information. So we've put in a lot of effort around empty, clean, dry, know what to throw, don't bag it, simple consumer tips to help people do that. We've invested millions of dollars. I think we're at $4 million year to date, and we're spending every month to invest people to reduce contamination. We've got more than 3 billion earned media opportunities because we put ourselves out there talking to major media outlets, creating awareness on this topic. And what I'm most excited about is we just launched a new K-12 education campaign. All of you know, right? You want to get the hearts and minds of people to recycle, you get to the kids, right? And kids will guilt any parent into recycling. So talked about service design, talked about education, technology. Right? We are putting in more capital-intensive recycling centers because it's producing a better product in the back end, less contaminated, and it's improving our working conditions. So things like robotics, elliptical sorters, elliptical screens, optical sorters, non-wrapping screens. Plano's a great example of that, right? Kind of a $30+ million investment in that. Again, tens of millions of dollars on top of that, upgrading facilities. Again, great for the stream, produces a better product, great for our people. So these are easier topics. Now we get tougher. Measurement. Right? How do we measure success? Right? Any program that measures based on weight is designed to fail. Right? And now that's an inconvenient truth that some of you don't want to hear because there's a lot of reasons we got into weight. Because it's something we can get our arms around, we can attach to, that feels good, right? The problem with that is it incents people in a single stream environment to put garbage into the waste. A great example from one of our general managers, he started charging contamination fees to one of his municipal customers. And the municipal customer called up, ranting and raving, and said, I can't believe that, I've been through this contract 10 times. And where in this contract does it say that you can charge me contamination fees? And his simple response was, hey, where in the contract does it say you can put garbage in my recycling? Right? And that's kind of the situation we're in right now, right? We've got to be honest with ourselves about what's really recyclable. The other thing is, right, when you measure based on weight, right, you're rewarding things like glass, which have almost no economic value, right? And you're penalizing things like aluminum, which have enormous economic value. So a ton of aluminum is like, I don't know, $1,100 right now. Glass could have some value depending on the market you're in or whatever statewide subsidies you have. But in many markets, glass is negative. You have to pay somebody to take it. It's sand, right? It's not a high value commodity over time. And by the way, the carbon footprint and kind of the CO2 equivalent abatement of aluminum 1 ton is 30 times, 30x of that which glass is, right? So we don't want to fool ourselves. We want to get clear on what it takes to measure success. So the alternative is understanding the true life cycle cost of these footprints. And I think Oregon, I'm sure some people are here in this room, I think they're working through this, but they're figuring this out, rewarding people on how much of the high quality commodities are you capturing that make a real difference both economically in the environment, right? And rewarding that, not just weight, but rewarding the full economic impact of that. So aluminum then would have far more value and you'd get far more credit on what you're doing to the environment than something like glass. More work to do together to sort through that, but measuring success is going to be a big part of our future. And then the last one, the business model. I touched on this. This got built out in a really bad time. And all 4 of the elements I talked about are important. This is the most important one. If we don't get this one fixed, right, we're not going to get there. We are not going to transform recycling and make it sustainable for the long term. Again, I wish I could go back to the late 90s, right, and get this thing put on good footing. But a wise man once said to me, there's 2 good times to plant a tree, 20 years ago and right now. And we are right now. Right now, we need to plant that tree together, right, and build an environmentally sustainable model that's built on an economically sustainable model. So again, no one over time is going to make big capital investments in a volatile space in our industry. That's not what our industry is about. Right? And I know what some people in this room are going to say, well, hold on, you don't understand. I just had somebody do that. I had somebody come in and write a big check in my market and make a big commitment on a model that was largely getting paid on the back door on commodity value, on the back end. And I'd say, you're right, because I see some of those examples. I'd also say, don't be fooled. This market and industry has got a few examples over the last year of people who've come in and done just that. They've taken a contract or gone into a market and made a bet. And over time, those bets have not worked out very well for either party. Right? Eventually, economics take over. Right? And if a deal isn't fair, right, if both sides aren't making money and it's not valuable over time for both sides, right, it won't work over time. So the optimal model is one where the company gets paid to collect the material, to process the material, and then the commodity value is owned by the customer. Now, we think we should share in that, and kind of an 80-20 is what we think about. And here's the reason. If we're the one processing, we need to have some skin in the game. We need to have skin in the game to produce a good product, right, at a high value, on time, right, because you're the owner of that commodity value over time, right? So the benefit of this model is that it's not based on China. It's not based on another industry. Right? We control our own destiny. Now, for this to work, right, the brass tacks is customers need to pay more. But here's the good news. Customers are willing to pay more. Right? We've done this research over and over and over. We've done it nationally, we've done it in a bunch of local markets and talked to residents, and we've asked them, are you willing to pay more? And the answer is yes. Right? They're willing to pay more than they're willing to pay more than their solid waste. That's how much they value it. And the good news is, not just do they say they're willing to pay more, they're actually paying more. So since China soared, we've had about 30% of our book of business on recycling renegotiated, where we worked together, found a mutually agreeable deal, but at the end of the day, their residents are paying more. So places like Kent, Washington, Chula Vista, California, Arlington, Texas, Fountain Hills, Arizona, across the country, we're seeing people pay more. And again, this isn't some unique trend of the municipal world. We're seeing that in our open market all over the place. Our average rates are higher than solid waste for recycling because people value it. So change is hard, right? And it's only possible if we work together. I mean, this is not some short-term negotiations ploy. Right? We run this business for the long term. We think about value for all. Right? And I personally think about what world am I leaving my two kids? Right? Are they going to live in a place that is cleaner, right? Where we value resources more over time? Both sides need some flexibility to make it work. And we voted with our feet. We've invested more than $100 million into this space at a time when commodity prices have cost us more than $100 million. So when we faced a big headwind, we've leaned in and we've invested. So in conclusion, recycling market's gone through tremendous change in the last 3 years. Right? Changes create some hardship, but I think this hardship is a big opportunity. We've got to build a model that's based on economic sustainability. Environmental sustainability will only happen with economic sustainability. And the great news is, right, the future's not knowable, but it's controllable. It's controllable by the people in this room. Right? We have the power and we have the responsibility to shape recycling and make it sustainable for the next generation. And I really believe this in my heart of hearts. I think we're going to do it. The leadership in this room, we are going to put this thing on a footing that's going to make recycling sustainable for generations to come. Thank you for listening. With that, let me take a few questions. All right, let me start out with an easy one. What are the worst contaminants you're seeing in the recycling stream? Let me tell you how bad contamination can get. In one of our contracts, we have a scale, a rebate scale, that we give to, obviously, to the municipality. There's a kind of a kickback to us based on how many dirty diapers we get in the stream. Just think about that. How many dirty diapers are put in the stream? That's how the scale works. So, and I could get far more gruesome than dirty diapers, unfortunately. Almost everything comes into the recycling centers. Bowling balls, garden hoses, ladders. And part of this is education, and people, it's convenient to dump everything in there. They don't care about recycling. Part of it's the other end of the extreme. It's wish cycling. People want to dump everything they can in the stream because they believe it is recycled and they want it to be true. What is the message conversation that we should be having with elected officials on recycling? Listen, I think where I just ended, man, recycling is within our control. It doesn't take much to make it work, and residents are willing to pay on that. And it's not dramatic pay differences, right? It's not dramatic pay differences. And you see this all over the place. We were in a town hall 24 months ago, and with the elected officials, and they said, well, I'm not sure, let's do a town hall, we'll talk to residents. And they said, who'd be willing to pay $2 more a month to put recycling on a good footing and keep it here in our community forever? Just universally, the hands go up. Now, listen, Oregon is not the same place as West Texas or Kentucky or parts of New England and other places, so there's local nuances, but in general, I think there's this belief that we can't raise prices or that's going to put me in some political dilemma. And every place we've seen people move, we've seen very little residential pushback. Legislators are discussing extended producer liability for the way to divert waste from landfills. Is this the right question to ask? Why or why not? I think it's a great question to ask. I really do. I think going upstream and where plastics is going, and we're working with some of the industry associations on that, to think about, hey, you should own, when you own your content and when you see the great garbage patch in the ocean, right, that should go right back here, right? You should be putting that on your back and feel responsibility for that. And we think that's great. We think it's great that, listen, people like, oh, plastics are recycling. And you guys know this. Man, there's many grades of plastic, some of which have high value, right? Your water bottle, that's pretty valuable. The clamshell you get at Whole Foods, right, which is this thick, is essentially garbage, has very little value over time. So how do we help people up front think about what materials are recyclable? We just spent time in Europe a couple weeks ago, meeting and understanding what they're doing, and looking at some of the big global chemical producers and think about, hey, how do we produce a product all the way at the front end before it even gets to consumer packaged goods, and to get that product so that it has full life cycle value, so that it can be recycled or frankly even upcycled in certain cases. So I think there's tons of potential there. We're just getting started. Why don't we have more investments in manufacturing recycled items into usable products instead of relying on dumping in China and other developed countries? I think that's a question that's very tightly connected. Again, I see China as painful for everybody in this room, but big opportunity because it's created us to think about innovating. It's made our recycling centers better. It's causing us to have a set of conversations upstream at a different pace and intensity than we did before. So I think that's a great opportunity over time for us to think about, again, working across the value chain, not just thinking of where do we send stuff, but how do we drive diversion upstream. Are you worried about the potential recession? Go back if you can. Are you worried about a potential recession impacting your model for sharing the cost of recycling with municipalities? Yes and no. Listen, there'll be some strain and struggle and a downturn, and I'm hoping, the economy is cyclical, and there will be a downturn at some point here. I'm hoping it's relatively short and shallow, but again, I don't have a corner on the truth on that front. I think that will cause, some more dialogue, but again, we play this is a long game we're running. This is not trying to meet some target for a month or a quarter or even a year. This is thinking about structurally, how do we make a difference in the next 100 years? Right, we put out our sustainability goals for 2030, and those are very ambitious goals, some of which we don't know how we're going to get there. Right? We need to continue to innovate to stretch ourselves to get there. So yeah, will there be some short-term give and take and push and pull? Of course there will over time. But I believe in the spirit of partnership, man, if both sides are going to be in it long term. Both sides have to have value, and we're going to get there together. What's your opinion regarding a refocus on recycling right or building infrastructure to process MSW and low-value commodities? I'm not sure I'm going to answer this question exactly, but diversion in Europe is the absolute mantra, and diversion from landfill specifically. And it's a culture where they burn things. I mean, that's kind of how they've gotten themselves wrapped around it. But because that's become such a strong belief of anti-landfill, right, we saw people do completely unnatural things. I mean, they took a product, reformatted it 3 times, moved it 15 times, only to stick it in a burner at the end of it, because this belief that they were somehow diverting from a landfill. You know, people say, well, you're a landfill company, that's where you make all your money. Nonsense. A landfill does not pay me 1 penny. Customers pay us. And that's why we value customers so importantly. Right? We want to be the provider of choice. We want to handle it from here. That's our promise to customers. We would prefer to divert everything out of landfills. Landfill space is not unlimited forever. Right? We want to do the right thing for the environment. We voted with our feet and with our wallets on that topic. So we want to do the right thing, but we have to be honest. We can't fool ourselves. We can't convince ourselves some belief is true when it really has no economic or environmental sense over time. How long do you think it will take consumers to change their recycling habits for the better? Listen, I think you are going to see an inevitable progress on this. And by the way, here's one of the reasons I'm bullish on recycling, for 3 reasons long term. I mean, I'm a huge optimist, in spite of all these challenges, for 3 reasons. 1, the world needs resources. Go over the next 50 years. The world needs resources. India, 1 billion people, their e-commerce society's hardly gotten built out yet. If that follows the pattern of China, their demand for fiber will be enormous. And so I see a world of population growth and economic growth with resources that are not growing at the same pace. So that means we will need to recycle things over time. Second reason is regulation. I think the pressure around Paris Accord, climate science, and everything else is going to push people to drive into diversion and recycling. And then the third is customers are willing to pay over time. They are willing to pay, and they want to pay to do the right thing. And frankly, it's not a lot of money for them to do that over time. All right, if we can reduce contamination by 1%, what is the potential cost savings for solid waste management companies? I think it so depends on the facility and the market, right? And we want to work together on that. And again, we in the spirit of partnership, if we can jointly work together on education that drives down diversion, we are wide open into sharing the economics of that front. And I think you're going to find that to be true of other providers as well, right? The thing we want most is let's get our incentives aligned. Right, let's work together to make a difference here. Do you see the growth in curbside programs? I'd put that back on you. That depends, right? If the model is economically sustainable, right? I think you're going to see willing providers to do it, right? But the market, it's got to be an economically viable model. And it's not the collection piece. Anybody, right? 2 guys can rent a truck, right, and get the garbage off the ground or the recycling off the ground, right? The long pole in the tent is recycling processing. Those facilities are not getting cheaper. Those facilities are getting more expensive, more sophisticated over time, and so that will be the difference, right? If there's willingness to pay, right, on the front end of the business and it's a viable, sustainable model, you'll see investment in the space. Do you hold your employees to be engaged in local government communities? Absolutely, right? That is a huge part of what we do. We have 168 general managers in our company, and let me give you an example of what I think is the the gold standard. Right? In one of our communities, the city doesn't hire any significant staff position that reports to the mayor without interviewing with our general manager. That's pretty good. Now, we've gotten there, we've gotten over 30 years of dedication, commitment to the city, partnership, working together. So that's the level of trust and respect that we have in these cases. And that's what we want our people to do. We want them to be integral parts of the community. We have 37,000 people. We have less than 1,000 people that work in our headquarters. Everybody else is out there in the communities in which we operate. So that's hugely valuable for us. All right, I have time for one more. How do you feel about temporarily suspending recycling programs? I hate it, man. Listen, we go to communities and we give them choice, which is let's get the economic model right. In some cases, people say, hey, I can do that later, but I can't handle this volatility. You take the commodities. And so we say, okay, we'll take the commodities, but we're going to take that as a premium because, again, we're not good with managing volatility over time. And the third choice is we just cancel the program. And we have a few people who've canceled the program, and frankly, we've limped along and we've kind of underwritten the program to say, hey, listen, let's wait, let's see if we can get kind of the politics right in the community. And they said, no, we want to push that thing out. To David's point earlier, I do think that's the exception, right? I think it is unlikely recycling falls into the ditch and we just see a decline on this. I think we need to be honest with ourselves on what's the real carbon footprint of the materials, what are the real economics. But again, I'm an optimist, I'm a believer. I think that we together are going to see this thing grow over time. You're telling me I'm out of time. I've really enjoyed the times. You have a terrific conference.